Daniel Maddox here, President of Elite Documentation. Today I'll be reviewing plain language guidelines and how they relate to this COVID-19 crisis. I'll be reviewing some general preparatory steps that you can take to ensure that you're ready to communicate via plain language during a crisis. And then I'll look at how the 8 plain language principles might apply specifically during the crisis that we're facing. So why are we doing this? Because it's even more important than usual to communicate via plain language in a crisis. People need it now more than ever, and the stakes are higher. So, what are some of those basic preparatory steps that we can take to ensure that we're prepared to communicate via plain language? We need to emphasize being prepared. It's very difficult to learn a new skill set on the fly. You have to be trained to communicate via plain language ahead of time. We make it as easy as possible in terms of training, but it's best to be prepared. Take care of this ahead of time. So go ahead and go to plainlanguage.gov. Start reviewing the plain language principles. You'll be better prepared for any crises that follow. Now, since in-person trainings are out of the question during a time when, in many states, even moderately sized gatherings are taboo, so consider web-based trainings as an alternative. Even for groups that are swamped, it's often possible to sneak in a quick lunch and learn session on this, something like that. We train departments of health in how to communicate via plain language. Guess who's swamped right now? But sometimes it's still possible to help out in that way. But just be careful because not all in-person training translates well to the online medium. So you need to make sure the person doing the training is skilled in that medium. And you should make sure that the training relates specifically to the plain language issues that you're facing currently. If you don't have that kind of expertise in-house, it'd be wise to get some help with that. Now, to stay sharp, you got to review your materials regularly to make sure you don't have overly complicated or unclear writing creeping in. Need to review your content ahead of time because you can't necessarily do that during a crisis. You have to at least identify the materials that are highest priority, highest use, so that you can review those and keep those updated from a plain language perspective. Now, how do you apply these principles? Let's look at each of the 8 principles and then just think about how would this principle apply specifically during this crisis. Right, for your audience. So this is really the core of any successful communication, right? It's even more critical right now. Your audience is probably a little bit different, no matter who you're writing for right now. Even the regular users of your content may be more tense. So have you considered, have you analyzed how your users' goals may have changed, their priorities may have changed, the emotional state that they're currently in? This is really the core principle and the most important thing to consider. Now, organizing content so that it's easy to be used. Do you understand the tasks that your users are trying to complete? What questions might they have? What questions might they have about COVID-19? And make sure you answer all these questions specifically up front. I recently reviewed a COVID-19 report written by a county health department in Kentucky, and I had to review the document carefully and get part of the way through it before I understood really the audience and purpose, since they didn't state that up front. It took some digging to figure out what they were driving at. And so when it comes certainly to public health communication, lives are at stake. And so we can't afford any unnecessarily complex content, can't afford any confusion. Choose your words carefully. Your words and your images. The image I used of Scar above and the reference, cultural reference, be prepared. The Lion King Disney movie How many of you recognize that reference and got that? Probably most of you. But if you're communicating information about the health and public safety of potentially millions of people, you can't afford to even lose 20% of your audience to an unclear cultural reference. And I intentionally included the image and reference above, sort of to point that out. We need to choose our words very carefully, make sure that they're understood by our audience. We need to be concise. Users are almost always looking for specific information when they access your content or your website. It's especially true for COVID-19 content. They're trying to make important health decisions, and so no extra words. We have to be considerate of that. Keep it conversational, and this is a tricky one, especially right now. As always, you should avoid trying to write to sound smart, but people, especially people who are stressed out, people who may be looking for COVID-19 information, um, they're not looking for you to communicate about the crisis in a wacky way or in a silly way, a funny way, maybe even. So just don't outsmart yourself in how you communicate, how you present content. It's just especially important to communicate in a distraction-free, orderly way right now. Design for reading or design for use. In other words, convey your content in a way that people will be able to find what they need quickly. Design so that they can find the information they're looking for right away, within seconds. You can't afford to focus on communicating what you want to communicate. Focus on their needs. Follow web standards. So for content that is going to be online, if it's on the web, you got to make sure you lead with the most important content and you write in chunks and you cut anything that's not absolutely necessary. And these guidelines are just always important, right? At any time, in any content that we put together. And parts of this content are included in the guidelines I covered previously. But if you don't follow web standards for crisis-related content, people will drop your website, your online content, even more quickly than usual. And perhaps they'll never come back because they were looking for help during a crisis. We have to take care of them. Finally, we need to test our assumptions. A wise software engineer once told me that the first version of anything stinks. Unless you put your information in front of real people who need it, there will just always be gaps and problems that you will not have anticipated ahead of time. So make sure you put your content in front of a small group, at least, of representative users before you release it to the general public, and just let us know if you need any help developing a plan to do that. And then going forward, make sure you provide a convenient feedback mechanism so that if your users need more information or something doesn't make sense, they can quickly get in touch with you and get the help that they need. We have to take care of people, especially at this time. So if you have any questions, or if you'd just like to continue the conversation, email me or visit our website.